Call to order the City Council special meeting Wednesday, January 19th, 2022. And I need an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Turn that down too. Okay, nobody has signed up to speak, but in the public comment, but we can see if anybody raised a hand to speak. And it looks like there is one hand raised, Rusty.
Okay. Are you there, Brian?
Hello, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't have my face. Is there a way to show my face so I can feel like I'm talking to somebody?
Hold on a second here.
There we go.
Oh, there he is.
So I was reading the agenda tonight. I know I only have a few minutes to speak about passing a bond. And sorry, Brian Taylor, 256 North Hemlock.
Thank you.
Yes. And I had been asked to speak about how to pass a bond, knowing that, you know, the city would like to pass one. A few things that we have to remember on passing the bond is knowing our constituents. So when we passed our school bond, we went through, you know, we failed on the first time, then we won on the second one based on communicating with our locals. You know, and it's very important that we know what they want. And being that there's only about 1,500 people that vote in Cannon Beach, and our median age is right around 55 years old, give or take a year or two. And a lot of them are fixed income, right? They are fixed income. Now they also may have a beautiful home on the beach that they can afford and a few other things. But we have to know what they want and what they're willing to pay per thousand. I'm not sure what, you know, obviously this is the very beginning of it, but I'm not sure what they're willing to pay. You know, and I believe a new city hall is important. A new police department is important. And of course, remodeling of our old Cannon Beach School is very important. You know, and like I said, it's very important that we communicate with all of our taxpayers, making sure that we know what they want, because if we don't know what they want, they aren't going to vote for it. We can take that one to the bank. You know, my biggest concern and why I'm speaking tonight on this is passing this bond and taxing our locals one more time.
We're not doing
Based on also our food tax. Now I understand the food tax isn't for our locals. Well, for me, it is, because I go out to eat at restaurants and I support our local restaurants. But, you know, mainly is trying to find out why, you know, why we need the money. And so you have to make sure that when you are going to pass a bond, you express why you need the money. And if our constituents don't believe that we need the money for what you're doing, then it may not happen. So, and it may take 2, 3, 4 tries. You know, getting out into the public is important. Relaying what you're doing is very important. You know, and you know, expressing why you need money from your taxpayers. You know, I'm questioning this bond based on the fact that the food tax passed and why we need more money for what we said the food tax was going to do? You know, why do we need more? Why are we taxing our people more? And that's the question you're going to have to answer. That's the questions that's going to come up from every single person that you're going to try to tax. You know, where are we going? What are we doing? You know, and to be honest with you, in full disclosure, is this personally, to me, feels a little bit like some smoke and mirrors. I mean, that's what it feels like to pass a bond after winning a food tax. It feels like, you know, and I know there's some other stuff going on, you know, which I'm not, you know, it's people, you know, local people doing stuff that they feel is right. But I would just be careful on the direction you're heading with asking more money out of our local economy.
Hey, Brian, you exceeded your time, but good advice. We thank you for your comments. And I think through the process here, a lot of your questions will be addressed. Thank you.
Yep, you bet. Of course. You're welcome.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Any other hands?
No, I don't see any more hands.
All right. Not seeing any other public comment requests. Go to the action items and discussions. First is the bond financing process overview, and I think Bruce is going to take that.
Thank you, sir. One point I want to make, Brian talked about two different projects in bonds. And the two projects that we're talking about, which is the Cannon Beach Elementary, and we're going to talk about City Hall tonight too. Those have funding sources, dedicated funding sources that are not taxes. And so when we go through the process, I think we'll talk about that and what the difference that makes. But we, at the direction of council, we're trying to find ways to do this without causing more cost on our citizens. And so we think we have a plan for that, but we'll be talking a little bit more about it. Specifically, we have Courtney Dawes from, help me with, is it Marisol? Mercero, okay, with Mercero Shannon. And Courtney is our bond counsel. And we have Matt Davidson from, no, Matt Donahue. I always make that mistake, sorry. Matt Donahue from DA Davidson. And Matt is our financial advisor. There are times when somebody can use a person with Matt's skills to participate in your process, and they have a to a degree, an interest in how that thing works. In our case, we want to make sure that the financial advisor, the municipal advisor, has a what is the fiduciary? Yes, fiduciary responsibility to the city. And so he is paid by the hour, but does not gain or lose based on the way that the process might be guided. So he has a fiduciary responsibility. So, and then we also have Ashley Driscoll, who is the city attorney, and she's working in this process also. So Courtney, I guess I'll turn it over to you. Right.
Thank you. Courtney Dowse with Mercer Shannon on council. Thank you for having me today. I'm joined with Matt Donahue, and I think he's going to start the presentation and walk you through some of the materials in your packet, and then I will walk you through the resolutions that have been included.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Courtney. So in your packet is a one-page memo, bullet points on the bond process overview. As Bruce said, I act as the city's municipal advisor, which is a role where I advise the city on debt issuance, borrowing money, and regulatorily and spiritually hold to a fiduciary level for the city. I'm working for you and for the best interests of the city in this transaction. So I have a PowerPoint that goes over the same information that you have on your one page. And I'll go through this. It's really high level about the process that we're going to embark on. I actually have started a little bit of pre-work. Please, if you have questions about anything, I'm happy to answer them as I go along. So there we go. So just as a summary about what we're speaking about today is the city is embarking on issuing a bond to public investors to raise money for Cannon Beach Elementary renovation. One thing I would clarify is that this is a bond that is not a voter approved bond to levy additional property taxes on the city. It is a bond is a term that is used in, I think a lot of people are understandably associated with a public, GO bond that raises property taxes. And this is not the case here, using existing revenue streams to pay back the debt service from existing tax sources. This type of bond, the jargon in our industry is called a full faith and credit obligation. It's a method in which the city promises to pay back the borrowing through any legal means. And it's a very strong security and helps you get the best interest rate out there in the bond market. The issuance process that we'll go over the different steps requires the engagement of certain professionals, firms specializing in this type of borrowing, including Courtney and myself, and typically takes 10 to 12 weeks from starting the process to receipt of funds in the city's bank account. So just to go over briefly the roles, municipal advisor, that my firm is DA Davidson & Co. I work out of Portland. We've kind of already talked about what type of role I play in the advice and analysis that we provide on behalf of the city. Bond counsel, Courtney here, representing Mercer Shannon. A couple other of the players is a paying agent, which engaged Zion's Bank Corporation. That's a bank that collects the payments and then distributes that payments to the bond holders, the investors who purchase the city's bonds. Now, the other one for a public issue, we need to hire an underwriter. An underwriter is a financial services firm which act as the intermediary between the city and the bond investors. And so we need to get one of those on board. We're in the process of drafting a request for proposals. So we're putting a competitive process out there for the banks that do this sort of work around the region and the country. And then we'll be selecting what we think is the best proposal from those responses from those banks. Getting into some of the timeline and key actions, the first step or an early step is the authorization of the issue. The city council will authorize staff to move ahead and execute the transaction of the borrowing. So do you want to stop here and talk more about the resolution, or do you want me to keep going through the whole thing?
I would say we get to the resolution so she can go straight thereafter.
Okay, I'll keep going. Well, more on that later. Stay tuned. Another big project, because this is a publicly offered bond, you need to create a prospectus for potential investors. We call that the preliminary official statement. And it's a large disclosure document about the city's finances, its economy, and any other information about the city that an investor would like to know before loaning the city money, borrowing, purchasing one of your bonds. There's a credit rating process, which the city goes to an independent third party to get a grade on their credit quality, their ability to repay the debt. That grade, given the expected credit quality of the city, will be in the investment grade range. And so it makes it worthwhile in terms of purchasing or paying them to do this independent review because it lowers their interest rates to investors. Investors rely on that in order to lend you the money, and they'll lend you the money at a lower rate if you have one of these credit ratings. I referred to the underwriter request for proposal. That's the process that we're going to go through to select an underwriter to purchase the bonds and be the entity that actually provides the funds through this bond film. Then there's, once we have those things together, the credit rating has been applied, the underwriter is on board, the disclosure document is drafted, we go out to the market, the underwriter distributes the preliminary official statements to investors through their sales force. And then on a certain day, we hold an order period in which the public has the opportunity to purchase the bonds, and the underwriter makes a proposal to the city to purchase the bonds at a certain price and lock in the rates for the issue. Once we agree upon that, then we move towards the bond closing. Lots of legal documents involved, according to preparing and working through that with the city. And then we'll help organize the funds moving to the city's bank account on a particular date. So right now, here's kind of the overview of the schedule. The authorizing resolution vote will take place here on February 1st. The council will have an opportunity to review the preliminary official statement, the disclosure document, sometime in mid-February. Scheduled to select an underwriter in mid-February, receive that credit rating at the beginning of March, publish that disclosure document for investors their first week of March, price the bonds or here obligations. I'm using those terms interchangeably on St. Patrick's Day, lucky day to price bonds, right? And closing and receiving funds on March 31st. Any questions about that? That was kind of, yeah.
I just want to clarify something for those who are watching. These are bonds that are being underwritten. One of the set of bonds is for the school is being underwritten by the Clatsop County lodging tax that we receive, the portion of. And the other is the City Hall and Police Station, and that's being underwritten by the food tax. So there are no votes requested for another bond measure. There's no other bond measure in our future at the moment. So just want to make sure that people understand that.
Do you anticipate what the costs are going to be for these different entities to be helping? Is there a percentage of the value?
So the one firm that does charge a percentage is the underwriter.
Yes.
So they charge it's called their underwriting spread. Essentially, they buy the bonds from the city at wholesale and sell them at a markup to investors at retail. That's essentially the middleman. So for this type of issue, I would expect that given what we're asking them to do, which is basically come in and just run the bond pricing and not have to do a lot of work on the prep side, that I'm thinking that it'll be 0.6% or 0.8% of the par amount.
Okay.
And so, I mean, hopefully by making them compete and, submit a proposal ahead of time, it's always the best way to get them to sharpen their pencils. in terms of doing a competitive underwriting fee.
And then it doesn't change. There's no negotiation after that.
No,
Okay.
not for their fee. No, that gets selected. Yeah.
Yes.
Matt, that was a good presentation. I want to talk about something that will become apparent when Courtney is doing her presentation. I've talked to you about the amount that we borrow, and we don't want to over borrow, and so you might err on the side of under borrowing to make sure you're not using real dollars to pay interest if you get too much money. And Matt, if you would walk us through what you're recommending, which I think is brilliant, it really does give us a good layer of protection for that. But it'll come up when, I'm sorry, if you would discuss it now, because it's going to be, one of the whereases or clauses in Courtney's presentation.
Sure.
So how are we going to cover that?
Yeah. So, I know there's some uncertainty about what the final costs of the project are. And if you were in a situation in which this was your only transaction that you're going to be doing in the near future, I'd probably recommend that you borrow the higher amount because it's cheaper to hold a bit of a higher amount and pay the interest than to be in the position of having to do a second smaller transaction, which comes with all these costs associated with again. However, you're in a good situation in which you already have another financing planned in the near future. And so I'd advise that you borrow on the lower end of what your projections are. And if that turns out not to be enough funds for the project, that you just increase your financing for City Hall Police Station by the amount that you need to complete your Cannon Beach Elementary project. Given that they're coming close enough together that that's feasible and it won't cost you any more in terms of the cost of issuance to add that as a project for the next financing.
So we would be doing financing for the finish of one project and complete the other project.
Right. And that's all that kind of stuff is like behind the scenes for the investors. You would just issue another series of full faith and credit obligations and they would see, what's the purpose of this? And if you needed to, you would just you would increase the size and add on the purpose of it. Otherwise, it doesn't affect the second financing at all.
And the timing is really good for that particular operation because we said we would wait till like the middle, let me see, sometime in October, maybe the end of October to find out money we actually collected in the first quarter. And then that would give us a chance to start the process and then possibly be closer to the end of the year before we actually did the borrowing. And so we would be 9-10 months into the project, Cannon Beach Elementary, at that time. So I think we will have good information leading up to that point. But it does address the problem I was pointing out to you earlier. Thank you.
I have a question on the timing of we sell the bonds. We got $4 million, but we're going to expend it over a 2-year period, say. Is that held in an investment? Is that up to the city to determine how it's going to invest those funds, or is that part of your program?
No, that the funds go over to the city and the city will hold them in an investment account, presumably with the government investment pool, which is, given the restrictions on what a city can invest in, and Lori can speak to that, is I think the best deal around right now and in terms of interest rates. So yeah, as the funds are in your possession, it will be accruing interest on it, but while you're expending them, you also will be earning interest on it.
Thank you.
It helps, soften the blow. So.
Any other questions for Matt? Courtney? For the resolution, please.
I believe you have 2 resolutions in the board packet. And I'm happy to start with whichever one is first, if you wouldn't mind pulling them up.
Start with the one for the school.
For the school.
Mhm.
Okay. So this resolution is the entire resolution that would be necessary in order for the council to authorize and complete the financing of the Canyon Beach Elementary School project. The first whereas states that the city has the authority to enter into financing agreements to finance real and personal property that the city determines is needed. We talk about bonds and obligations. The actual agreement that the city will enter will be a bond purchase or a purchase agreement, but it may also enter into a financing agreement to kind of detail the relationship between the paying agent Zions and the city, and making payments to Zions, and the Zions would be making payments to the bondholders. So that's why there's descriptions of financing agreements in this resolution. The second whereas recites that the city charter does not prohibit the city from entering into such agreement or pledging its qualification credit. And it does not require a non-appropriation clause to be included in the financing. The city, in the third whereas, the city has determined that capital projects are needed, including updating, repairing, remodeling, and equipping the former elementary school property to serve primarily as a tourism-related facility with tangible benefits as a community center. The following whereas states that the estimated average weighted life of the financing agreement will not exceed the estimated weighted average life of the cost of the project or the projects. And this is a statutory requirement that typically is not hard to meet when you're financing real property projects. Following whereas says that the city anticipates incurring expenditures to finance the cost of the project, and that it may reimburse itself for expenses that are paid in advance of receiving the bond proceeds. And the city needs to evidence its intent to reimburse itself with bond proceeds before the expenditure is made, absent some exceptions to that requirement.
This reimbursement is just for the expenditures in securing the bonds, not expenditures that we've already made and getting the project started.
The latter, if the city has made expenses now that it hopes to reimburse with bond proceeds when they're available, then this reimbursement resolution language is required.
And that's included later in this resolution?
It is.
Yes. So it's already in, it's two resolutions in one.
And the final whereas is the city desires to execute the financing agreement and to finance the project. So section 1 authorizes the financing agreement in the principal amount not to exceed $4,600,000, and that the proceeds shall be used to finance the projects. It authorizes the issue to be split into one or more financing agreements, and it may be issued as a taxable or tax exempt obligation at a rate as determined by the authorized representative. The method of sale in section B authorizes the authorized representative to determine if the issue will be sold in a public offering, which Matt discussed earlier, or a private placement. I think Matt has recommended a public offering, but the private placement language is in here in case something changes and Matt's recommendation changes. The authorized representative of the city doesn't have to come back to council in order to complete the financing. C details the imposition in case of a private placement, and D details the authorization in event of a public offering. In event of a public offering, the city would authorize the obligations to be sold to the investors. In addition to a financing agreement, if the obligations are sold in a public offering, the city would also enter into an escrow agreement with Zions, directing Zions to issue the obligations on the city's behalf. Section 2 details the security, as was previously discussed. These are not voter-approved general obligation bonds of the city. They would be payable from the city's full faith and credit and all legally available funds available to the city. There may be a source of revenue that the city chooses to use to pay the debt service on these obligations, but that source of revenue is not pledged to the payment of the obligations. The city is pledging its full faith and credit. Section 3 designates the city manager, the finance director, or either of their designees as the authorized representative. This resolution gives broad authority to the authorized representative to make determinations regarding the financing in compliance with this resolution. Section 4 lists out the detail of some of the things that the authorized representative is authorized to do on behalf of the city. In Section A, they're authorized to determine the method of sale, the provisions of notice of sale if sold at a competitive sale, and then act upon bids received or execute a purchase agreement to complete the sale. The authorized representative is authorized to establish the maturity and data dates of the obligations, the principal amounts, capitalized interest, if any, redemption provisions, interest rates, and all other terms of the financing agreement and obligations. Section C, in the case of a public offering, the authorized representative can determine the terms of the financing agreement and the escrow agreement entered into with Zions. Section D, the authorized representative is authorized to deem final the preliminary and final official statements. Matt referenced a prospectus that the city will prepare that will be distributed to potential prospective investors so that they may make an investment decision. It's the city's document and the council will have an opportunity to review that before it's distributed, but the city is authorizing the authorized representative to make the final determination regarding the distribution and content of that document. Section E authorizes this authorized representative to determine if the obligations will be in book entry certificate in book entry form.
Would you explain what that is?
Sure. That's a good question. So the depository trust company is the company that keeps a record of the beneficial holders of the bonds. And their system is the book entry only system. The bonds are actually the payee on the bonds is actually Seed & Co., which is the nominee for the depository trust company. So Zions will work with the depository trust company to determine the actual owners of the bonds and determine that when the city makes a payment to repay the bonds to Zions, then Zions and DTC ensure that the beneficial owners actually end up receiving the money that they're owed. Anything to add on that?
No, I was just, in the battle days, you buy a bond and you have a certificate, right? And there'd be a bunch of things that you tear off and bring to the bank and they give you money, right? Those are known as bearer bonds. And so that was, and these days, the owners of the bonds are just, kept track of in this database by the depository trust company.
Okay, thank you.
Section F authorizes the application for ratings for the obligations and to determine, which rating or credit agencies will be requested to provide ratings. Section G says that the authorized representative may designate the obligations as a qualified tax exempt obligation. This is a designation that the city may make if it intends to or if it plans to issue less than $10 million of tax exempt debt in the calendar year. It can designate the financing agreement and obligations as a qualified tax exempt obligation, which potentially can result in a lower interest rate to the city.
Won't we be in that situation?
We've discussed that. I think would depend on the timing and amount of the city's issuance of the police station city hall debt later this year, or early next.
Is it based on a calendar year?
It is.
Okay.
Section H authorizes the execution and delivery of a tax certificate. There'll be more to come in this resolution, but assuming the obligations are tax exempt obligations, there are certain requirements that have to be complied with in order to maintain the tax exempt status of the obligations. Section I authorizes the representative to execute a continuing disclosure agreement. For obligations that are issued publicly under a preliminary and final official statement, the city will have an obligation to update some of the information in that disclosure document on an annual basis. J, the authorized representative can engage the services of other professionals that may be necessary or desirable for the financing. K, the authorized representative can determine which funds are available to pay the financing agreement. Although council will determine in this resolution that regardless of which funds are available, the city's pledging all of its funds, all of its available funds. And L, the representative can take any other action or execute any documents desirable in order to complete the financing in accordance with this resolution. And since they can take any other action as well. Section 5 discusses the tax exempt status of the obligation. Obligations will be sold presumably on a tax exempt basis, and that means that the owners of the debt do not have to pay interest on the, or do not have to pay taxes on the interest that they receive from the city. And in order for the city to maintain that special status of a tax exempt obligation, it needs to comply with certain requirements under the tax code. They're listed here generally, but there are arbitrage rebate requirements. So those rules govern how the city invests the funds and how the city uses the projects that are financed with the tax exempt proceeds.
Could you go back to the section we talked about? If we were financing less than $10 million in a year, we could be tax exempt.
Yes.
I take it from that if it's more than that, we can't, and yet we covenant.
So
It's based on timing, and now we're making a covenant that it will be tax exempt.
that's a good question. Section 4G says that the authorized representative can designate the obligations as a qualified tax exempt obligation. And that's a special term from the code. And this would be an additional designation in addition to a tax exempt debt. The city does not have a limit on how much tax exempt debt that it can issue under the tax code, as long as the projects meet the requirements. This special designation as a qualified tax exempt obligation is really kind of a narrow part of the code that allows banks to have a better, or to take advantage of the fact that there are tax exempt debt. And maybe Matt can explain this a little better than I can.
Sure, I'll try. This is often called bank qualification, which, as Courtney was saying, allows banks, they purchase the bonds to pay less taxes on the income they're receiving from the interest payments on the bonds. And so that makes the bonds more valuable to the universe of commercial banks that make investments in taxes and bonds. So almost always it has a beneficial effect on lowering your interest cost, because now the bank investors have an additional incentive to buy the bonds. And so the limit on the $10 million is only for this extra bank tax incentive. If you go over 10 million, then you won't get the extra bank incentive, but you follow all those other rules in those sections, you still get the regular tax exemption from investors having to pay income tax on the payments to them. Does that clarify?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So back to section 5. In addition to rules regarding how the city spends and invests the funds, there are restrictions on how the projects can be used. Specifically, there are limits on how much of the project can be used by in private business use. And then there are also reporting requirements related to the tax code. So in the tax certificate, the city will agree to comply with the tax requirements. And this section states that the city will comply, and then the authorized representative is authorized to sign the tax certificate, which details those requirements and allows the issue to be tax exempt. Section 6, the city is appointing Zions as paying agent and registrar. Section 7, the city is appointing my firm as special counsel or bond counsel to the city for this issuance. Section 8 appoints, Section 8 authorizes the authorized representative to appoint an underwriter, a placement agent, or a lender for the financing. Section 9 appoints Matt's firm, D.A. Davidson, as municipal advisor. Section 10, we discussed this briefly earlier, continuing disclosure. The city will have obligation to update the disclosure that it distributes to investors on an annual basis. And in this section, the city is agreeing to comply with that requirement to make updates as necessary. There are annual updates required, and then if certain special events happen, the city's also obligated to notify investors, such as if it enters into another material loan, or if the ratings change, or other kind of material events that happen in connection with the borrowing. Section 11 authorizes the distribution and preparation of the preliminary and final official statements. This is the prospectus that we talked about earlier that is distributed to investors. It's the city's document. Council will have an opportunity to review, but does not need to formally approve the document before it's distributed. The city is authorizing the authorized representative to do so, to approve that document in this resolution. Section 12 states that the authorized representative is authorized to negotiate all the terms, sign all the documents, and complete the financing. And there's no other action of city council necessary in order for the authorized representative to complete the financing. Section 13 says that this resolution constitutes a contract with the owners of the obligations. And section 14 states a little bit more detail regarding the qualified tax exempt obligation language that Matt kindly explained earlier. If the city does not expect to issue more than $10 million in the calendar year, then it can designate these as a qualified tax exempt obligation. And my understanding is that the plans currently allow the city to make this designation. Section 15 completes the city's intent to reimburse. So if the city has made expenditures that it would like to reimburse with obligation proceeds when they're available, then the city can do so with this intent to reimburse evidenced. If there are expenditures that have happened prior to this intent being adopted, there is a potential for them to be reimbursable if they are preliminary expenditures such as architecture, engineering, or a de minimis amount can also be reimbursed without having this resolution in place. Section 16 authorizes the authorized representative to establish post-issuance compliance procedures. We provide a form of a post-issuance compliance procedure to the city for consideration, but the post-issuance compliance procedures cover record-keeping requirements and requirements that are necessary in order to preserve the tax exempt status of the obligations and to comply with the continuing disclosure requirements if sold on to the public market.
That covers everything for Cannon Beach Elementary. Any questions? One thing I'd like to point out is when we're talking about the reimbursement portion of the resolution, if I recall, the classrooms was between 1 and 2, or probably 2 and 2.5 million. I'm sorry, 250,000 and 300,000. So that's the amount that we could pay ourselves back to the general fund. But I don't anticipate that we would either do the asbestos removal or the gym roof before we actually receive the funds.
So I believe there's one more resolution.
Yeah.
And it is a reimbursement resolution for the city police station. And I believe that this resolution is also proposed to be considered on February 1st so that the city can preserve its ability to reimburse expenditures. As I mentioned, there are some limits as to what the city can reimburse. Generally, the reimbursement resolution needs to be in place before the expenditures are made. There are exceptions to that rule, and they're kind of detailed here. Certain preliminary expenditures up to 20% of the proceeds do not need a reimbursement resolution in place. There's also a de minimis amount of generally 5% of the proceeds that are not subject to the limitation of having this reimbursement resolution in place prior to the expenditure.
Yeah, I have a question. Why do we not need a similar resolution for the elementary school?
A similar resolution is required for the elementary school, and the required terms of reimbursement are incorporated. That's reviewed. So if this elementary school resolution is considered on February 1st, then you could look back 60 days from February 1st and capture any expenditures that were made in that window and reimburse those. And then also there is an opportunity to reimburse preliminary expenditures, architectural, engineering, surveys, those kinds of things, up to 20% of the total amount of the issue. And then in addition, without a reimbursement resolution, you can also reimburse to the lesser of $100,000 or 5% of the obligation proceeds.
Okay, I'm missing something. I didn't see those terms in the resolution we just discussed.
Correct.
And the one we're starting to look at now, my understanding is that's just for the police station, city hall.
The terms related to reimbursement in the elementary school resolution are not provided in as much detail as the city hall police station reimbursement resolution. The required provisions in order to be able to reimburse are included in the elementary school resolution in the the fifth whereas. which states that the city anticipates incurring expenditures to finance the cost of the project. And then
And in
Section
15,
15, intent to reimburse. So all of the detail regarding the rules that is provided in the City Hall Police Station reimbursement resolution is left out of the elementary school reimbursement or elementary school resolution simply because the financing is ready to go. It would be perfectly appropriate to add all of the detail that relates to reimbursement to the former elementary school resolution, and I'm happy to do that.
I think it might be good to do that.
and the reason it's in the City Hall Police Department is that financing will come later. And there's going to be a period of time that we're likely to have expenditures. And so we want to detail that out in
Correct.
greater detail. Okay.
Back to the City Hall Police Station reimbursement resolution, which details, some of the requirements. Section 2 recites the reimbursement period. This restriction also applies to reimbursement regarding the former elementary school project. But again, the rule isn't detailed in that resolution, but it still applies. And that is that there's a limit on how much time can pass before the reimbursement is made. And it's detailed here. The reimbursement has to be made no later than 18 months after the later date of the date the expenditure is made or the program or the project's placed in service. But in no event can the reimbursement occur 3 years after the expenditure. Section 3 recites the description of the project, construction, remodeling, furnishing, and equipping of the City Hall Police Station and related capital projects. And Section 4 says that the anticipated cost, the incidental costs, is not anticipated to exceed $17,500,000. And Section 5 authorizes the city manager, the finance director, or either of their designees to take any further action that might be necessary.
I have a question, I think, for Matt. Section 4 sets the anticipated cost at 17.5. Now we're going to potentially look to this issue for maybe, $1 million to $1.5 million for Cannon Beach Elementary. Should this number be increased to accommodate that?
Well, I think that number is related, as you say, this is the cost of the project as defined in here, which is the City Hall Police Station project. So I probably don't think it's absolutely necessary. And it's also an anticipated amount. I don't know, what do you think?
I agree. And probably what will happen is you will have funds available to pay the elementary school project, hopefully, and it will carry you until the issuance of the City Hall Police Station issuance. So there may not be a time where you need to reimburse more elementary school projects because you'll have funds from the original elementary school financing and then funds from the second issuance. But if there is a time that you're out of money and you're spending the city's own money with the intent to reimburse after the issuance of the City Hall Police Station, then another resolution would be required in order to redefine the project here. Actually, no, you already have it. You could do it because you already have the reimbursement in the former elementary school resolution. So maybe we would have to look at how much is being spent, but I think that it would be okay to not have that additional amount in here.
Okay, so if we do have to use the Donahue plan to get the additional funds. We're not limited to the 17.5 if we wanted another million or million and a half. We wouldn't want to say that we're authorized up to that amount total.
Yeah, that authorization and limit will come when you pass the authorizing resolution for
Okay,
that,
so this,
for that financing.
yeah, all right, so you're just describing a project now that is, we're saying we might ask for reimbursement for certain costs. When we get to the actual authorization, that's when we would modify this number to be the cost of this project plus whatever else we needed for Cannon Beach Elementary.
Correct.
So eventually we actually have the right number on it, but we don't know what that is right now. Okay, all right, thank you.
Commingling comes to mind.
It's all transparent, it'll all be laid out and accounted for.
So it isn't just one straight set here and one's here.
In
You can
terms-
actually reimburse different ways.
Can you
Or
expand?
I just thought one is one track, one is the other track. And so for the city hall and this police station, you wouldn't be reimbursing the elementary school. Is
Correct.
that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because we can't use TLT funds for the city hall and police station.
Correct.
So we aren't, they have to be in separate.
It was the other one I was more concerned about going the other way. Yeah.
Now, I thought you were referring to when you have a single borrowing in which you have two purposes. If you get to the point, we're discussing where you will borrow under a single issue, but the proceeds will be separated into different projects.
And that'll be described in the resolution and every document we put out.
Exactly. And the debt service associated with each of those will be, accounted for and tracked to the penny. It's common for cities to use the full faith and credit obligation structure to finance several projects, while underneath the sources of the payment of the debt service come from sewer, or come from, in your case, TLT, or come from beverage tax. So the investor, it just looks like one bond, but on your side, you're separating it out depending on the project and the source of everything.
Any questions? And so you'll be asked, or these two resolutions will be put before you on February 1st. If you adopt those, we'll move forward on the schedule that you were shown earlier. And eventually, we will be coming to you with an authorization for City Hall. But we don't know what that number is going to be, and we're not comfortable saying that we should borrow the money now. And then there may be, because we lowered this amount to be borrowed, because we want to be on the low side for that, there may be some funding for Cannon Beach Elementary. When we go for the bond, it will be primarily for City Hall, Police Station.
I guess my only concern is about inflation. And couldn't that be about 20% over the time?
Yes, and that is a concern. The number for, when I said 5.5, that included some inflationary costs. If you remember, it was originally like 3.8, but it was just, kind of the bare bones sort of a thing. So then it went to 4.5, and I said 5.5 because of the way costs and things like that are going. The cost shown here, the 17.5, is an escalation of, I think, either 4 or 5% from the first time, which was like 15 million, the price for the city hall. It's gone up to where it's this number. I think that we will have a lot more information as far as what the construction costs, what's happening in construction costs, when we start getting into the Candy Beach Elementary project, to where we can say that, no, 17.5 did not incorporate enough of an inflation factor to be able to be done for that price. So you have a very good question. It's accounted for to the amount that I thought was reasonable in Candy Beach Elementary. And it is just an older number of 4 or 5% for City Hall. But that will probably have to be adjusted.
Well, and I guess my concern is we really haven't landed on what the architectural plan is for the city hall and the police station.
Right.
We don't have square footage. We don't have a lot of those things nailed down.
We have square footage.
Would that be required to be getting this loan in the first place?
No.
And by the time we get to sometime in October, when we'll be looking at the number, we anticipate we'll have schematic design for the City Hall Police Station complete and have a much better estimate at that time before we go for the borrowing.
And the public process will have taken place, right?
Oh, yes, yeah. That's all pre-schematic design. Questions?
I wasn't listening carefully enough, but I thought I heard you say 5.5
Yeah,
or for the.
Candy Beach Elementary. For Candy Beach, yes, for the Candy Beach Elementary project.
And yet this resolution is for 4.6.
Right,
How do we get there?
knowing that, that's what I was calling the Donahue plan, that we will have enough money to get to November. And then we can add, because we'll have better information.
Okay.
Is there anything that council would like to see other than these resolutions on February 1st? And I will try to give Courtney more definitive information on when certain expenditures occurred so that we can be realistic about what we might be reimbursed.
Okay. I guess see a lot of heads nodding that bring it back to us.
Yeah. And council has been good about funding some of the pre-information and some of the initial work for Candy Beach Elementary, and hopefully we'll be able to bring that back to the general fund.
Good. Thank you.
All right,
Guess we're ready for the next topic. And you folks can hang around or you can take off.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Good.
I don't know why we've never had anybody say, oh, I'll stick around.
We have an election challenge coming up.
Yeah,
I don't want to be the first one.
yeah.
I thought Lori would be the first one to jump up and take off.
Huh? I didn't hear that.
I said, I thought you'd be the first one to jump up. And
No, staying to the bitter end.
all right.
Okay, thanks, folks, and thanks for driving over.
Yeah, thank you.
Never a chore to visit Cannon Beach.
Yeah,
Contribute to your TLT revenues a little bit.
Good. Well, we're not collecting it yet.
but
TLT, yeah.
Oh, you're staying.
they'll be paying tonight.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I
Contribute.
was thinking of the food tank.
All right, see you, Matt.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Ashley, want to update us?
Yeah, good evening, Council President and Council. I'm going to talk about the pending election challenge for the prepared food tax ballot measure. For the benefit mostly of the public, I'm going to go over a little bit of what is going on with that challenge, how it started, what happened to it during a month-long period, and what are the steps going forward. So under a very limited provision of Oregon law, so it's ORS Chapter 258, persons that participate in an election can challenge the results by filing an election contest. That filing has to be filed with the circuit court within 7 days of a recount. That did happen in this case. So within 7 days of our finalizing our recount, or the county finalizing the recount on the Cannon Beach ballot measure, there was a petition filed in Clatsop County Circuit Court. That was on December 15th, 2021. As I said, it's a very limited, very specific procedure that somebody has to use in order to challenge an election using this means. They have to first file that petition with the county within 7 days of a recount, and then they have to take other specific statutory steps. One of them is that within 2 business days of filing that petition, they have to serve by certified mail any contestee. So in this case, the only contestee was Clatsop County. Then they have to post a notice in a local newspaper, a newspaper of local circulation within 3 business days of filing the petition with the county. That posting then has to advise the public of your right to intervene in the case and setting the 10-day period in order to intervene. Once those 3 steps have been made, Clatsop County Circuit Court then gets jurisdiction over the case. Jurisdiction meaning they can hear the case. In this situation, that first filing was done correctly, that there was a petition filed within Clatsop County Circuit Court. However, the 2 days passed, the 3 days passed, the 5 days passed, and the other steps were not taken. 26 days after filing the petition in Clatsop County Circuit Court, the county received personal service of the petition. Well, the statute requires that the service be by certified mail. So the service was again inadequate. And then second, to my knowledge, and I talked to the county on the way down here, there has been no posting in a newspaper of general circulation within the county. So I have been in conversation with the county, asking, what steps they are taking, what were they going to do, and immediately found out when they received their inadequate service that they were going to file a motion to dismiss, making the arguments that I just went over. That again, it's a very limited statutory right to object or to contest the results of the election. There's certain steps that you have to take, and those steps were not taken. So last Friday, the Clatsop County filed a motion to dismiss in circuit court, essentially, saying that the circuit court never gained jurisdiction over this matter because these steps weren't taken. So I spoke to the county on the way down. I asked, what was going on, if there was any updates. What I heard was that they, it was just filed Friday. Monday was a holiday. It's now, is it Wednesday? It's Wednesday. The court has yet to set hearing, but they anticipate, especially since an election matter, a hearing should be set in an expedited fashion. So the county is going to have a hearing, trying to get the case dismissed. So where does this leave the city? As a party, because it was our ballot measure, we do have an interest in this case. So we have an opportunity to intervene if necessary. In this situation, because those other steps haven't been taken, for instance, there's no posting in the newspaper, that's what opens the door for us to file our motion to intervene, and that hasn't even happened yet. So at this point, I'm not recommending that we actually file the motion to intervene. However, I would like the council to authorize me to do so if and when that ever becomes necessary. So that's what is on the agenda tonight. I believe I have a suggested motion. If I move to authorize the city's legal counsel to file a motion to intervene in Miller and Tuckman v. Kresvauko, the county clerk, I've never had to say that name out loud, so I apologize to Tracy. Clatsop County case number 21 CV 47811, if the case is not dismissed for lack of jurisdiction. Any questions?
Can you tell us what the advantage of intervening is?
Yeah, so it is to protect the city's interests. So there's only one contestee. Right now, the petitioners are not necessarily saying that the city of Cannon Beach took any action in violation of the statute. However, the petition is vague, and it's not particularly clear to me that there will not develop allegations that implicate city matters or city officials. So because it's vague, because we only have this 10-day period to intervene, and once that passes, we can't later decide to intervene. My advice is to be better safe than sorry, because the petition is vague, because, you know, some of the statements in the petition could implicate city officials. I would like us to be conservative and take that step in the hopes that we're never going to actually have to be an active intervener, if that makes sense.
And what you would do as an intervener would be to defend whoever they might be noticing of having an issue.
Yeah, it's to represent city interest. You know, they make some statements in the contestees or contestors or the petitioners make some statements in the petition that seem to implicate that maybe they're talking about city officials. And if that is the case, then we want to make sure that, you know, all of the facts are out there and that the city's interests are represented.
So far, they haven't named any city officials, but they did say, and other issues. And they've not identified any of those things.
Yeah, they use very open-ended terms like other facts to be developed.
So if the judge, contrary to all the rules, decides to hear the case, then we have, how many days did you say? 10 days?
We would
intervene.
have 10 days, yeah.
Okay.
And what I don't want to do, although you guys do meet on a regular basis, is have to call an emergency meeting to get my authority to intervene. So I have that in my back pocket in case it's necessary.
Any more questions? Then we need a motion to authorize legal counsel to file a motion.
I move to authorize the city's legal counsel to file a motion to intervene in Miller and Tuckman v. Kravanko et al. Clatsop County case number 21CV 47811 if the case is not dismissed for lack of jurisdiction.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Jennifer?
Yeah. Okay, Counselor Ogilvy,
Yes.
Counselor McCarthy,
Yes.
Counselor Risley,
Yes.
Council President Benefield.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we will have to use this.
Yeah, hopefully.
Covers the action items. Is there anything for good of the order?
Yes. Okay, so today, the power company was going along Larch Street, trimming trees more aggressively than they usually are. And when I spoke to the gentleman that was doing the work, he said, yes, that they've changed the spec and that unfortunately, Mike just walked by at that same time. So I said, Mike, would you come and listen?
There are only two counselors.
But I'm not, I didn't call anybody else. But he encouraged us to get a hold of Heather Householder, who would be the one to speak for the power company and also to get our arborist and have a meeting among the community, because he said this happened in Portland. And Portland people were really upset because they have a lot of heritage trees, and it became a real issue. And he said they decided that they would tone it back to what they were doing before. We all understand the importance of having the power where, protected. But I think, Mike, you mentioned, wow, you're talking about 40% more trimming.
It wasn't just a little bit more, it was a lot more. He gave us the figures, and frankly, I think they used to cut like 4 feet back or 6 feet. Now, anyway, they're cutting back, I think, 10 feet. And that, I saw one of the trees, and it was, they were cutting branches that big around, they were getting aggressive. I think it would be wise to invite householder, the representative from Civic.
Isn't it Jeff Gearhart, our arborist?
Yes, and just have a meeting. And I think what this individual that's actually, frankly, I think he's feeling really bad about cutting the trees, but that was their policy and that's what he had to do. He said they're through for now in doing the city, their residential areas. They're going to be out on the highway doing the same thing. But it gives us a little time to get this meeting and see if we can't get the less aggressive policy back in place. Oh, I think
For Cannon Beach.
for Cannon Beach.
Yeah. Yeah, because he said he was shocked that
He was what?
he was very surprised that they would take that approach with Cannon Beach, because we're known for our caring about trees, and being a Tree City USA. So I think it's good advice to hold a meeting and maybe get the community to support this lesser approach.
Yeah, I would hope, and I think by just having a meeting with Pacific Power and our arborist and staff, we could probably get that accomplished without getting the public all riled up. If they don't agree, then yes, everybody turns off their lights. I don't know what happened.
Well, and they feel badly being the bad guys doing this, because if their instructions are different, it'll be a better outcome.
So I don't know, could you provide the information to Bruce and
I can.
or Karen, well, Bruce?
Yeah.
And ask you to arrange.
Sure. No, with your direction, we'll go ahead and we'll have that meeting.
Okay.
We'll get it done as quickly as we can. Karen has a great relationship with Pacific Power, and they've been quite responsive on a number of issues. So we'll get on there right away.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If you just maybe email me the name,
I will do it now.
okay? Tell me how to spell it?
Pardon me?
Or you can just tell me how to spell it. You
Oh,
can, or text it, whatever.
I'll just,
Okay, fine.
yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else for good of the order?
Coffee with the counselors on Monday at 10 a.m. Everybody is invited to Zoom in, and Robin and I will be there too. And Bruce, and I think Rick Hudson also said he was coming to Coffee with the Counselors to talk about the tsunami
Yes.
response. And any problems or questions that people might have, it might be a good time for them to ask. If you can't come to Coffee with the Counselors at 10 a.m. on Monday, it will be recorded and available for viewing afterwards.
Okay,
Robin, I just got a text from Karen, so she's on it.
Oh, perfect. Does she have the phone number of the person to reach?
Not until you send it to me.
Okay.
We have,
Okay,
She has Heather's contact
Yeah.
information.
okay.
okay. Oh,
Just something very quick. Bruce, have you gotten any information from Ecola Park about the road and how long they anticipate it may be staying closed?
I have not, but I will get that information and email it to you all.
Okay, thank you.
And I doubt that, Bruce, you have this information, something Karen would be on top of. Is there any estimate on how long the beach exit at 7th Street will be closed and under construction?
I don't know. I'll get you that information also.
I think we can put that out. You know, every time I walk up that way, everybody's asking me what's going on, what's
Sure.
going to be done. And
Yeah.
and there's rumors that they're going to build a road right down to the beach. And we need to get some information out there on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another thing too that was mentioned to me was about Gower Street and how the logs really came up this weekend there. And we're concerned maybe about the location we're selecting
Location of what?
for City Hall.
Oh.
Yeah. Just because of the logs that came up.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.